Hello everyone, this is David, and tonight's movie that we watched is Godzilla vs. Biollante, which is probably the most obscure out of all of the Godzilla movies. If you mention about any of the other Godzilla monsters, someone will probably have heard of it, at least in passing. Biollante, however, is one that is very hard to find for some reason, even though it was on tape in the US back when it came out, so I don't know why it's such an obscure film, but it is a very strange film. So, and this one is interesting because it is a direct sequel to Godzilla's Return, or Return of Godzilla slash Godzilla 1985. Not many movies in the Godzilla franchise are direct sequels, like taking place immediately after and following events with logical conclusions. That being said, the entire Heisei era, from 1984 to 1994, is more or less one string of consecutive films, each film taking place after the other. There's no restart to canon, and it's more or less events happen in order. There's no jumping into the future or the past or anything like that, really. Well, other than there will be a little bit of time travel, but it's just a little bit. It's fine. That being said, let's talk about Biollante here. So, what is Biollante? Well, it is a giant plant, for lack of a better term, that has Godzilla's DNA. So it's a giant mutant plant rose thing. It's like a rose Godzilla hybrid. So it starts off in its flower form, where it's like a 200-foot tall rose that has vines that have snappy mouths. That in and of itself is pretty interesting, but he eventually evolves into a massive predatory form. The rose form can't move, but the predatory form can, and it has like a big crocodile head, and he can spit acid and vomit forth pollens and whatnot, which cause all sorts of problems. He doesn't have a lot of powers other than, apparently, if he's sufficiently damaged. Well, I think actually Biollante is supposed to be a she. We'll get into that in a minute. But I think if she's sufficiently damaged, she turns into this kind of like dust, and it flies off to reform later, which I think is interesting. It's kind of like, well, I don't really know what else to put it like. It's kind of like it can kind of go out of phase and teleport to safety or something like that. Anyway, so the other thing about Biollante is, allegedly, and I don't think this comes through very well in the dub, but Biollante is supposed to have the soul of the person who engineered its existence's daughter. This Dr. Shirazawa, not Shirazawa, he was from the old one. What was his name? Shiragami. Yeah, there we go. Very similar, yet, you can see where I'm coming from. Anyway, so let's talk about this movie a little bit. So this picks up immediately following the cleanup, or immediately following the events of Godzilla 1985. They're cleaning up Tokyo, and they're looking for pieces of Godzilla. They find some, and American soldiers steal it, and are going to extract it for research for a American bio company. Turns out a mercenary kills all of the Americans and steals the sample himself, brings it to the Middle East. In Saradia, or Sa-Aradia? I don't remember exactly. I don't believe... It's just like generic Middle Eastern country, I believe. They have the guy, Shiragama, there working with it. Well, terrorists attack, blow up the place, and kill his daughter. So it flash forwards 5 years to 1989. Well, 4 years if you're in the American. And he is still working on stuff, but now he's not working with Godzilla cells. He's working with roses, specifically their psychic abilities. Apparently roses have psychic abilities. And he's working on making an anti-nuclear energy bacteria. And so they're working on that, and that will be the basis for Biollante. There's a lot of espionage going around with a bunch of stuff, and Godzilla doesn't show up till quite later in this movie. Same thing with Biollante, it doesn't show up till a little bit later. What ends up happening is they're basically terrorists, and they're like, you need to give us the anti-radiation bacteria, and if you don't, we'll blow up Mount Mihara and let Godzilla out. And so what ends up happening is Godzilla ends up getting let out. And Biollante ends up getting released by killing a bunch of terrorists in the lab that go to steal the scientist's research on the anti-nuclear energy bacteria. Also, another character is introduced, and this is an interesting one because she's a reoccurring character throughout the series, which is another first, and I believe only, as this doesn't really happen in any of the other Godzilla films. Well, any of the other Godzilla, I guess, cycles, for lack of a better term, and that's Miki Sagusa, who is a psychic who can link up with Godzilla and kind of control him, but not really. Like, he's still very powerful, so it's overwhelming for her to try to control him, but she can, like, kind of make him do certain things to a limited extent. But anyway, so, long story short, what ends up happening is they rebuild the Super X, called Super X2. They give it a new shield to deflect Godzilla's ray beams better, so they can direct it back at him. Godzilla fights it. It kind of overpowers him, goes back for repairs. Biollante appears. Godzilla fights it because he can sense its presence, kind of Highlander style. It's in its rose form at this point. It's a brief fight. Godzilla kicks its ass, blows it up. It turns into like the spores. They fly up into the sky. They're trying all sorts of stuff to stop Godzilla. Nothing's working. They're not stopping him. Biollante shows back up, final form. This is a little bit later. The big old alligator head form, which you may or may not be familiar with, and attacks. Godzilla's basically fatally wounded in the battle, and Biollante is physical form is destroyed, but it goes back into like its spore form, flies off. Godzilla retreats to the ocean, and that is where he kind of collapses into the ocean and swims as much as he can off. And meanwhile, the terrorists are still going, but they end up killing the doctor that created, the scientist that created all this, Shiragami. He ends up dying, and but they end up killing the terrorists, so they win. And at the end of the day, you hear a voiceover by Shiragami's daughter, suggesting that she is in fact, her soul has reincarnated or been transferred or whatever into the soul of this monster Biollante. And that is Godzilla vs. Biollante. I recommend watching this one because it's very different, very weird Godzilla movie, and it is part of a series. That being the Heisei era, but I mean they go in kind of logical order, so it helps to understand what's going on in the next one if you watch what went on in this one. I mean, a little bit. They're not like required. It's not like Lord of the Rings where you're not going to know what, if you just pick up Return of the King, you're going to be like, why the hell is all this happening? What's this stuff? But it is nice to be able to watch them in order and whatnot. So that's good. That being said, again, there's not as much monster footage in this one. That's kind of unfortunate because Biollante is a pretty interesting monster. It's got it's the only one kind of like it. It's a plant kaiju. Those are pretty rare as far as I'm aware. Pretty rare. Haven't seen many in this series. And it doesn't have a lot of powers, but the ability to turn into spores and fly away is pretty cool. Anyway, I wouldn't really classify him as a classic Godzilla enemy. He does show up every once in a blue moon, and sometimes he's in the video games and other peripherals, but he really hasn't made an actual legitimate appearance in a Godzilla movie since this one, so that is what it is. Anyway, folks, that's Godzilla vs. Biollante. Coming up next is the return of a classic. Yeah, that's right. It's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Next time. All right. Good night, folks.